didn't come to the trial in Toronto as a rank amateur. Give us your impression.
Well, your trial began in January of 1985, and it was, of course, it evolved into a media showcase of that era, really. And I had been a reporter for radio stations in upstate New York, as well as an Associated Press wire writer. And I was also working for a newspaper in Washington, D.C. at the time. None of my past or present employers assigned me to your trial. I went on my own initiative freelance. I felt that in Canada, which was a country that I had admired as sharing some of our U.S. values of freedom of speech and freedom of press, for you as a publisher to be put on trial for printing the book, Did 6 Million Really Die?, was not just an outrage, but it was also highly interesting from the point of view of pure journalism. And since I had written to you and you indicated that I would be able to take up a position reporting the trial from inside your home, I really thought that this was a scoop that I couldn't miss. And so I hopped on the bus from Ithaca, New York in 1985, a wintry Sunday evening, and came up here. And I was very glad I did. Saul Littman of the Simon Wiesenthal Center did try to have me expelled from the press gallery, but I had legitimate press credentials, so he was foiled in that regard.
Now, that was, of course, at a time when our place was buzzing with people. I mean, it was like an anthill with all kinds of experts and clerks and cooks and typists and researchers around.
I noticed that the activity went from, this is a 4-story building, I believe, it went from the basement where people were folding newsletters right up to the top floor where professors of history were engaged in researching and assisting the defense of Doug Christie. So it really was the revisionist think capital of the world during your trial, and I wonder if that unique experience will ever be repeated. In a sense, the enemies of truth had attempted to persecute you, to jail you, and yet, by virtue of their own vindictiveness, they ended up putting together a revisionist brain trust that would have never come together had it not been for this attempt at denying you your rights. I'm acutely aware of the fact that you have always been something of a showman because you wanted to advance a cause by which no normal means was capable of disseminating it. So you more or less assessed the situation and felt that you would become the P.T. Barnum of revisionism. So you attempted to dissuade me from coming because they said, Zundel's an eccentric, and this is going to be a rout, and you're going to be associated with it. Well, I didn't pay that any heed, and I'm glad that I didn't. But once I was here, I realized that, like so many showmen, what you had been doing was what was necessary to break through this media curtain. And when I got here, I found the epitome of professionalism. And I also found that other people had agreed with me. They felt that the issue of you being on trial for printing a book, Did 6 Million Really Die?, and facing prosecution as a result of that, that it was necessary that anyone who cared and had something to contribute to your team would come. The caliber of your defense team was so sterling that it made up for the fact that the writer had refused to come, the author of the book. And also, as you know, you ran into other people who in other venues had been iconoclastic. Because you were on trial not only for Did 6 Million Really Die, but also a pamphlet that you wrote, The West War and Islam, which basically put the secret society of Freemasons in the dock. So you cast your net of defense witnesses very broadly, and I noticed that you always looked for the best in the field. You weren't at all reluctant to go and ask the top man by telephone to come here. And of course, you were tried twice, once in 1985 and another time in 1988. And the so-called Holocaust survivors took such a beating in 1985, and I mean by that intellectually, under Doug Christie, your defense lawyer's cross-examination, that not one of them dared to return to the 1988 trial. So for me, the special value of that 1985 trial is that your defense attorney was able to face down these allegedly unimpeachable, infallible Holocaust survivors and cut their testimony to ribbons.
One of the leading lights of the Holocaust lobby was, of course, the #1 witness against me. He gave lengthy testimony and didn't show up during the second trial. Any idea why?
I think to Robert Forison leading your team, it was really a debate between Foreson and Hilberg, using the excellent offices of Doug Christie as the mouthpiece for Dr. Foreson. And we did elicit from Hilberg some amazing statements, which if you or I were to say it on this television program, the ADL, the thought police that monitor our every word, would say it was an outrage. But yet a Jewish Holocaust historian admitted that there was no written order for Adolf Hitler ever ordering any extermination of the Jews. No scientific document indicating that there had been a gassing. Well, these were world historic revelations that Doug Christie was able to elicit, and I think that Dr. Hilberg was so shaken by having to admit these things that he in no way wanted to come for the second trial.
It's interesting, his reaction when I looked at his face when Doug Christie asked him for one scientific report on gassings. One scientific report, one autopsy report. And he had to say, I am at a loss. I am at a loss.
And this is the top Jewish expert. We're not calling him the top one. This is what the Crown of Canada called the very best, the author of The Destruction of European Jewry, which is supposed to be the magisterial, definitive, authoritative book. And he had to even admit that he wrote this book never having been to Auschwitz. The real ultimate success in terms of deflating these pompous figures was when we faced down Rudolf Verba, real name Walter Rosenberg, who is the star of the war report that came out of World War II, and he was supposed to be the star witness and one of the earliest witnesses of the gassings at Auschwitz. And he wrote a book called I Cannot Forgive, and he was supposed to be an unimpeachable source. And after the relentless cross-examination of Doug Christie, this unimpeachable source confessed in court that his book, I Cannot Forgive, was not a document for a court. It's an artistic picture, I believe, was the verbatim in the transcript. You realized that this was sort of an Armageddon, a Ragnarok for revisionism, and you brought to it everyone you possibly could. You never relaxed. You never shortened on your budget. You could have said, gosh, maybe I should keep some money aside in case I'm convicted and everyone forgets about me and I'm sent to the gulag. You did it as total warfare, to go to the trenches because you knew you weren't only on trial, but truth was on trial. It wasn't just your rights that were in the balance, it was the civil and human rights of the Canadian people.
Remember the day when we walked up to the courthouse steps and we were confronted by the most unsightly group of people that you ever see outside a courtroom?
They were terrorists, and it was outrageous that the government of Canada allowed them to congregate there for the express purpose of trying to assassinate you and to kill your attorney and your supporters. And they made their very best effort. And if it had not been for some young men that you had gathered around you that without pay voluntarily came forward to protect your person and the person of your attorney, as well as your research staff, serious bodily harm would have come to you. And I believe that Samizdat has film documentation of that, videotape documentation of the assault on your lawyer and on you on the courthouse steps of a Canadian courthouse in January of 1985 by Jewish terrorists who were out to kill you.
You were talking about Doug Christie, my attorney. You had covered court cases before in your career for the mainstream media.
I had heard the same sort of allegations about Doug as had been made about you. That he was a fly-by-night guy who had an office the size of your backyard, which is quite small, and that his biggest case was defending some guy who had stolen a turkey out in Vancouver, you know, and that he was in way over his head and that you should spend millions and get the equivalent of F. Lee Bailey. Well, Doug Christie seems to have been a gift of the gods or destiny or whatever, because he came into this court. And yes, I have had experience reporting trials, and he had a laser-like mind and still does have one, and his cross-examination skills were superb. How he honed them in the smaller cases, which I presume he handled before yours, I don't know. He must have been a natural-born cross-examiner. He was also the bane of judges, is what I had heard, on the West Coast, and that happened to be one allegation which didn't, in fact, prove to be true. We've always wanted rational debate. We've never asked for anything else. We didn't want to be drawn into a courtroom situation, which you and I both feel is essentially a Talmudic arena. At the same time, however, they have not allowed us a debate. Deborah Lipstadt, the author of the liturgy, the chief liturgy that reporters are supposed to turn to when they have a question about Holocaust revisionism, the denial book, because she doesn't want us to be known as Holocaust revisionists, but rather as Holocaust deniers. She is the one that has laid down the law for all reporters who don't wish to be labeled or tarred with the expression anti-Semitic, that we are not to be debated. Well, why do you fear debate? If our position is so flat-earthist and ridiculous, they should welcome debate. The reason they fear it is for the prima facie evidence that your trials have presented. When they bring in their best debaters and their best stars in an effort to send you to jail, they're cut to pieces by revisionist research. And that's why they won't debate, and that's what your trials have proven. If we can meet them in free and fair debating ground, they will lose. Because what they are suggesting, that there were these massive exterminations, is a tissue of fabrication.